All right, hang with me, Carrie. There we go. Can we see that okay? Okay, fantastic. We'll go ahead and get started. The session that I want to present today is what I'm calling the new PBL for teachers, and it's really kind of a play on words, but it's also kind of a flip model that I think principals particularly need to think about as they think about growing new leaders in their school. So this is not necessarily going to be a presentation on how to use project-based learning, although there are some elements to that. But the flip is we're going to let teachers do the PBL. And the ultimate goal is for principals, the new PBL is principals building leaders. And we're always, or we should always be focused on growing leaders in our building because it's very difficult to do everything by ourselves. So we'll just kind of go through the slide deck and I'll talk with you as I can and make it very informal. If you have any questions, let me know, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. So Carrie went through my bio here. I do have a new website up, reimagineschools.now.com. So if you have an interest in finding the podcast, you can find it there. And if anyone has an interest in learning more about our online programs at Georgetown College, I am the director of the leadership program. So principals out there that want to be a superintendent or a DPP or supervisor of instruction, hit me up and I'd be glad to talk with you. Also, if you're on Twitter, give me a follow there. You can see on the image there at Dr. Greg Goins. I'd love to interact with you and talk with you about your journey in school leadership. So let's talk a little bit about the role of the principal. And I found this lonely guy here looking out the window. Looks like he's very distraught, like he's had a tough day. And this is a stock photo, so it's not a principal, but it could be. But anyone in a leadership position, it's very challenging because, the old adage, it's lonely at the top is very real. And there are a lot of days you just feel like the weight of the world is on you, and you're always looking for the next big solution or the next big idea to kind of move your school or your business forward. So because it's such an isolating position, sometimes we kind of get lost in that, and we need to find ways to build capacity with our staff. We need to find people that can help carry some of the load in our school, which means we might give up a little bit of control along the way, but we need to have everybody kind of rowing together in this we are crew mentality. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Simon Sinek. The greatest contribution of a leader is to make other leaders. So the goal is not to create a situation in which you want followers. We want to create opportunities where teacher leaders in your building can become leaders and have a voice in what you're doing in terms of school improvement. So just kind of keep that in mind as we kind of roll through the slide deck and get an idea of what the goal is. But the goal is certainly this new PBL is principals building leaders. So whether that's a grow your own type program or just identifying people in your building that you think can take on a little bit more of the responsibility for school improvement. So I think one of the things that we have to talk about is this idea that, obviously we're going through this teacher crisis right now. There's a teacher shortage, and there's a lot of different reasons why people are leaving. I saw a statistic just this morning. I think 300,000 educators, faculty, and staff members have left the profession between 2020 and 2022 for a wide variety of reasons. Commissioner Glass just released some information, I think, before the school year started, that 72% of Kentucky teachers are at risk of leaving the profession for a wide variety of reasons, not just dissatisfaction, but maybe they're ready for retirement, maybe they're looking for opportunities to enter the private sector to make more money, or maybe it's more of a traditional reason, low pay, too much pressure with high stakes testing, a lot of reasons there. And as Todd Whitaker said a couple times today, I made a few notes in both his sessions. The number one reason people leave is because of their boss. And so we have to also take that into consideration when we think about building a positive culture. But I pulled this tweet out the other day from Melissa Harvey, who is a middle school principal in the state of Texas. And she basically conducted what she calls stay interviews with her teachers. And she did this, I guess, over the summer before the school year started, trying to figure out what her staff was going to look like. But I just thought it was a very thoughtful way of making teachers part of the process. You could call it an exit interview, which is one approach. But in this case, I like the terminology stay interview, because we want to really know what you think. And we want to figure out a way to keep you here because you're a valuable part of the team. And as we look at this teacher shortage, it becomes more and more important that we kind of find out what makes people tick. And, let them share some ideas, brainstorm, jot down a few notes, and just have a heart-to-heart conversation about what they like, what they don't like, and do they feel like they're part of the process. So I thought that was very well done. And so you can follow Melissa on Twitter. There's her handle at Melissa_J Harvey. So again, we talk about this idea that the role of the principal is so important. And again, I'll refer to Whitaker a lot today, just because he was so good again this morning. But Whitaker said, if you had a chance to listen to him, was if the principal sneezes, the whole building catches a cold. So that's the impact of the school administrator, of the leader of the building. And if you're in the Georgetown College program, you know that I use John Gordon a lot. I use a lot of other podcasts, webinars, TED Talks. And John Gordon is a great author of The Energy Bus and The Power of Building Positive Teams. He says the number one reason people leave their jobs is because they don't feel appreciated. And he encourages people to really show appreciation and gratitude for those people in your building. The bottom line is, if we're going to grow new leaders in our schools, we have to empower teachers. So really what I want to get to at the root of the presentation today is just talking about professional development in general and why there are some issues there. And I'm going to provide a few solutions that you might be able to take with you as we think about flipping PBL. So if you think about the traditional model of professional development, first of all, I'm not a big fan of the term develop. No one really wants to be developed. I mean, it just sounds horrible. I think of a drill sergeant screaming and yelling at me while I'm, lining up in the morning or getting ready to do calisthenics. So I'm not a big fan of the development terminology, but I understand that it's so ingrained in the education vernacular that we're probably not going to get rid of it. My preference is professional learning. And I used to think the worst thing that we did to teachers was, after they work all day in the classroom from 7:30 to 3:30 or whatever your schedule is, then we trot everybody down into the largest room in the building, whether it's the cafeteria or the gym, and we bring in an expert speaker. And I've been that expert speaker before, and some days it's a very positive experience. Most of the time, it's not a great experience for teachers because it's the old one-size-fits-all approach. And whoever the speaker that's coming in is there for a specific reason. Maybe they're an expert on PBL, or maybe they're an expert on, maybe you have Ruby Payne in for a poverty workshop. And those things are great. And I'm not saying that they're not needed, but only a small portion of the people in the room are probably going to be really engaged and really excited about that topic. So the one size fits all, we know, is not the best way to do things. I can't tell you how many times as a former superintendent, principal myself, we would do one of these things after school. The teachers would moan and groan about it. Most of them I could see grading papers and not really paying attention during the session. It was impossible to get our coaches there because they would rather run off to practice or do whatever they have to do with their teams. And it was just not a good situation, and really, quite frankly, hurt our culture and our morale at times. Now, even though that is one of those kind of pet peeves of mine, I think I'm leaning more toward a bigger problem in the fact that we tell teachers what they should be doing and we don't give them enough choice. Right now in Kentucky, I don't know if everyone's aware of this or not, but we have a forward-thinking commissioner in Dr. Jason Glass, and we are really on the cutting edge of a lot of innovative things nationally here in Kentucky. We're the only state, or one of the few states, that has a statewide portrait of a graduate mission statement, in which we want every school district to create their own portrait of a graduate, which I think is very powerful for school districts. We also have a partnership with PBL Works. So PBL is a big push right now in what you're doing in Kentucky schools. And of course, deeper learning. You can't breathe or turn around without someone talking about deeper learning. It's everywhere, and it's a much needed initiative and conversation, but it can't be the only thing that we ask teachers to do. I learned a long time ago, the worst thing you can do is tell teachers what they're going to do. That's probably the quickest and fastest way you're going to lose them and their support is, send out that email and say, beginning such a date, we're all going to do this. I think teachers need choice. And I think that's one of the things we really need to spend some time thinking about. So this, I understand this is a necessary evil at times, back to school institute day, to start this school year, I went down to Greenup County School District and I was the keynote speaker. Hopefully I provided some inspiration for them and, try to lift them up and kind of talk about just in general, why the role of teachers is so important, and hoping they can kick off and have a great school year. So I wasn't there specifically to talk about poverty or deeper learning or PBIS or any of those type of conversations. So sometimes we get lost in this idea that we have to bring in these fancy speakers or these experts. And this is one of my favorite quotes from a Canadian school teacher who I've actually had on my podcast, named Brian Aspinall. Sometimes the greatest PD is the teacher down the hall. We have great teachers in school districts all across Kentucky. We just do. Now, some places are more innovative than others. And, that all depends on where you're at, what the climate is. Do you have a green light culture in which your administration is going to allow you to take big risks? And with big risk come big rewards. But some districts like to play it a little bit closer to the vest. But we have to trust teachers, and we have to really depend on everyone in our building, because going down and, you can see this teacher here alone, maybe on her prep period. I'm sure she has a lot to offer, and we don't do a good enough job of sharing all the great things we do in our classrooms. One of my favorite blogs is from Jennifer Gonzalez, who has the Cult of Pedagogy. And she had a blog post a couple years ago about pineapple charts and teachers allowing each other to come into their classroom at any time, just to be an observer, just to sit in the back of the room and watch with no judgment. And they put a little pineapple ring around the door to indicate that you were welcome to come in at any time and observe the class. So we need to spend more time talking to teachers in our buildings, whether that be small groups or making classroom visits. So if you've been in the Georgetown College program, again, we're fully online, and I do things a little different. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing or somewhere in between, but I always describe our program as project-based learning for adults, because what you're going to do in our principal program, or really any of our programs, it's really a 5-step process. And you could see here, I've pulled the gold standard PBL graphic that they have from PBL Works. PBL for adults works really the same way it works for kids. In this case, for our Georgetown College students, the 5 steps are: you're going to identify a problem that you have in your school. And, that can be a lot of different things. And our candidates typically work with the building principal to figure out what those big problems might be. Then they're going to form a committee of their peers. That could be grade level committee. It could be by wing, or you can just choose people from different buildings, however you want to do it, whether it's a school-wide committee or a district-wide committee. You're going to put this committee together, and you're going to become the lead researcher in trying to solve this problem. At the end of the day, being a school leader is about problem solving. And so my goal is to teach you how to be a problem solver. And so this is part of that process. The third piece is, as you become the lead researcher in whatever topic it is you choose, you're going to start discovering best practices, and you're going to start discovering possible solutions for improvement. And a lot of times, quite frankly, principals don't have a lot of time, because they're busy putting out fires all day, to really sit down and take the time to go into strategic planning mode. But it's so necessary in terms of school improvement and leading deep change. So then after the student at Georgetown, meets with the committee, they come up with what they're going to study, discover the possible solutions, then they're going to create an action plan. And ultimately, they're going to share it with the committee. And the statistic that I'm most proud of, and I haven't checked it in a while, but I know it's close. A vast majority, well over 80% of our students that do our capstone project, the topics that they choose are typically implemented at the school level because A, the principal's involved from the very beginning and what the problem is and what some of the solutions are, and B, because they put the work in and they really become an expert in that topic and they're able to really provide some value to the school in terms of, what leading change is going to look like to make whatever problem better down the road. So this is kind of a 5-step process. And again, this is PBL for adults. So they're working together, they're spending time talking, brainstorming, all these kind of things. Now, we talked about this idea that teachers, the teacher down the hall, sometimes your greatest resource. And again, I go back to this idea. Too many times we tell teachers what they have to do. We're all going to go down and listen to somebody speak about whatever the case may be. But if we trust teachers and we actually spend time talking with them and ask them, what interests do you have? What is it you really want to dive into? When I was a superintendent and a principal, I was the king of pilot projects. I had all kinds of things going because I'm a big believer in this idea of research and development. And, Fortune 500 companies spend millions of dollars every year in R&D to try to figure out what the next great thing is, what's the next great product, or even something simple like how can we improve customer satisfaction? So I had all types of pilots going. Now, some of them didn't work, and that's okay because we have to accept the fact that failure in schools is not a death sentence. It's okay to take a risk. It's okay to fail once in a while. And we all know that fail is just that first attempt in learning. So, we learn more from failure than we do success a lot of times. And so I always encourage the teachers that I had as a principal and superintendent, what do you have an interest in? If you could change your classroom and do anything, maybe if you had an unlimited budget, what would you want to do? How would you want to teach different? How would the instruction be different if we weren't always knocking you over the head about doing it a certain way? And these are just a lot of the things, a lot of the different topics that I've had on my podcast that people are really passionate about. A lot of people are talking about changing their grading practices, looking at student portfolios. A lot of people, especially at the elementary level, are really excited about flexible seating. Co-teaching is a popular topic. A genius hour, if you want kids to be more creative in the classroom, you can learn more about that. I work with the Modern Classrooms Project. We have a ton of Kentucky educators that are either piloting that or actually going through our paid professional learning program right now. Maybe you want to take a look at homework and do something different there. Maybe you want to build a maker space in your middle school. If we just talk to teachers and give them options, there are a lot of different things we can do other than, just what the principal, goals are for that given year. And again, I realize we've thrown a lot of things at them. And the big thing right now is the deeper learning and the PBL. And those things can certainly be an integral part of your school improvement process. That doesn't mean it needs to be the only part of the school improvement process. And when I hear people say, well, we don't have the capacity to take on anything else, we've got too much going on. Well, that's fine, but I hope you pick the things that are really important in your building and the thing that the majority of your staff is really passionate about, because if not, it's going to have an adverse effect on what you're doing. Find space to do a lot of different things and don't limit yourself just to a few things along the way would be my advice. But there are great ideas all throughout your building if we just give teachers a chance and if we trust them to talk about those things. So let's move into PD. And again, I've talked about this idea that I'm a big believer in choice. And I think we need to give educators more choice in what they want to do. This is someone that has a podcast. This is Casey Bell. She has had the Shake Up Learning podcast for quite some time. Again, I've had her on my podcast. She created a podcast PD choice board. I've been doing podcast PD in my Georgetown College programs for the 6 years I've been here. And that simply means I may not be able to bring Todd Whitaker into every class to be a guest speaker, but I can do a podcast PD with my class in which they can listen to the 30-minute episode that I did with him. They can, share that with the people in their school and their buildings. They can have conversations. It's no different than a book study, which I'm also a big believer in book studies for teachers, and they don't all have to read the same book. I've had multiple book studies going on at the same time, depending on what grade level and what topic people have an interest in. Again, going back to choice. But Casey came up with this. It's kind of a bingo card, and these are some of her favorite podcasts, and she put them in different categories. And there are districts out there that will actually give educators PD credit for listening to a podcast and writing a reflection. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's free PD. So whether you're in your car, you're on the treadmill, 30, 35 minutes for a podcast episode, and whether you're listening to mine, Reimagine Schools, or something like Shake Up Learning, there are so many podcasts out there. This is really kind of the golden age of podcasting. So there's a lot of free PD out there. And every school leader, in my opinion, should create what I call a PD playlist that can drive professional learning and school improvement. And so I'm going to kind of show you what that looks like here in the next slide. I just put this together this morning, just kind of thinking about if I was a principal today in a school, how would I go about leading professional development in my school? And this is just simply a Google sheet. And I created a few different categories here, and you can do this a lot of different ways. This is just kind of a starting point. But, creating some categories, there are different podcasts you can listen to. If you need help with that, reach out and I can give you a list of some of the popular podcast networks. But you could see Reimagine Schools here. And not all of these are linked because this is just kind of a mock-up to show you what this would look like. But not only podcast, I use TED Talks a lot in my Georgetown College classes because they're short and they're very impactful. So people like Sir Ken Robinson, Simon Sinek, who you just saw the quote from, Angela Duckworth has done a lot of research about grit. And, Rita Pearson, we've probably all seen Rita Pearson's famous TED Talk, Every Child Needs a Champion. So there are so many great educational themed TED Talks out there that you can use. So make that part of your PD playlist and make it available. There are videos that I use in my class that you can use as well. Prince EA is a rapper who's also kind of a wordsmith that creates a lot of word poetry, has some great videos about what school could be. And what school could be is actually on here. That is a great website that Ted Dintersmith has put together with all types of resources. Films, if you're going to be a student at Georgetown College, it is required, you will watch Most Likely to Succeed, which is the most impactful educational reform documentary that you'll find. They'll also watch The Finland Phenomenon. And there are tons of others. I could have listed probably 15 or 20. Blogs are a great resource for professional development where you can pick up new ideas, just like Twitter. Ditch that textbook. Some of you have heard of Matt Miller and Cult of Pedagogy. I mentioned Jennifer Gonzalez earlier. So you can create this PD playlist and you can customize it to meet whatever needs you have in your school. And you can hyperlink this to external links or other pages, and you can kind of decide what that looks like and give people a choice board as to how they want to go about their own professional learning. And then I added co-ops here. The co-ops are really doing a wonderful job. They always have, of offering professional development in their regions. A lot of it is geared toward deeper learning right now, as it should be. But maybe you make a directory for them so it's easier to find those offerings. So the PD playlist is something I would definitely think about creating. And again, if you need help with that, give me a shout out. At the end of the day, as the principal, this is something I want you to really think about. If you get nothing else out of the 25, 30 minutes that I provide today, the best schools create what I call a green light culture to spark innovation. Again, if you really want to kill the morale in your building, let a teacher come to you as principal and say, Dr. Goins, I just saw a great video about flexible seating. I want to take all the tables out of my classroom, put a few bean bags in, put a few tables in, and I think it's really going to be a game changer for my third grade classroom. And if I immediately say no without having any conversation, then I'm going to lose that third grade teacher. And not only am I going to lose that third grade teacher, She's going to go tell the other third grade teachers. They're going to tell other people in your building. And before long, no one's going to come to you and share any ideas if they're going to get shot down without at least having some conversation and some consideration. This goes back to my philosophy of, you have to create a yes culture within reason, of course, but I try to green light those things. If it's not going to be too costly and if it's not going to be too disruptive, what's it hurt to see? Let's roll with it and see what happens. And even if I have to send a letter out to those third grade parents that says, we're going to try something a little bit different during the month of February and March, and we're going to do an assessment as it continues, and we're going to go from there. You probably don't have to do that, go to that extreme, but I've had other people ask me if they could do that. I don't know why not. But, again, it goes back to this idea of piloting things, seeing what works. How do we know if something works if we're too afraid to try? And, we continue to really hang our hat on this traditional model of teaching, what it looks like, what it's always looked like. And we have to get the teacher out of the front of the classroom for the entire period, lecturing to students, because teachers need to move from the transfer of knowledge to creating design experiences. So students need to go from being just those that sit there and absorb like a sponge what's being said. They need to be kind of the pilot of their own airplane in terms of taking ownership of their own learning. So I think this is very important to remember for all educators. So now you're thinking, well, that's great, Dr. Goins. This all sounds wonderful, but this is going to be a disaster in my school because of X, Y, Z. And we can always come up with a million reasons why we shouldn't do anything. But everything that I'm giving you is really built into this idea of design thinking. And if you've not heard of design thinking, the Stanford University has a D school or a design school that has been using design thinking for a very long time in the business community and in the private sector. And it's just now starting to move into P-12 education. But really design thinking is this idea, there are different steps. And it really begins with defining what the problem is, truly understanding what the problem is, taking a deep dive into that. They use the word ideate for create. Ideate is simply a fancy word for brainstorming and kind of throwing a lot of ideas together. Some of them aren't going to be very good, but you're going to, some of them are going to stick. And that's where you get a lot of the good stuff. After you kind of ideate and figure out what direction you want to go, you're going to build a prototype. So, in terms of productivity, if it's a fashion school, a prototype would be a new dress or something like that. In education, a prototype would just be a new idea or a new way of doing things. So it's going to be systematically, you're going to design what this would look like if you are going to pilot it. And then the test phase, once we're going to deliver it, the test phase is just kind of going into that pilot phase and kind of seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. Now, the great thing about the pilot phase is it's not permanent. And once we discover mistakes, then we're going to be able to go ahead and correct those immediately and continue to make that kind of a living, breathing design thinking experience in which we're going to improve kind of as we're doing it. So design thinking is important. We talk about it a lot in project-based learning, again, both for students and adults. John Spencer is the author of a couple great books on innovation in schools. He actually created what's called the launch cycle with AJ Giuliani. And launch is an acronym for L is look, listen, and learn, because we have to spend the time to dive in and learn what the problem is. A is for asking tons of questions. U is to understand the process or the problem. N is to navigate ideas. C is to create a prototype. H is to highlight what doesn't work and fix it. And then L is to launch to an audience. And so, again, if I'm going to dive into project-based learning with kids in my classroom, I'm probably going to use the launch cycle as kind of a springboard to what PBL looks like in my classroom, along with those gold standards that Bob Lenz provides from PBL Works. So again, keep in mind, this is what the goal is going to be as we think about professional development for adults. So another thing that has just kind of popped up that is becoming more and more popular at Google is what they're calling a design sprint. And again, this goes back to the idea of design thinking And a design sprint is typically going to be a 4 or 5 day activity in which you get together with your team. Day one, again, you're going to go through the steps, you're going to map it out, you're going to sketch and decide what the solution may be, you're going to build the prototype, and you're going to test it. I actually did this to some degree when I was a superintendent and principal. Many of you may be familiar with what's called FedEx days. FedEx, we know, is a courier, and their logo is when you absolutely positively have to deliver something overnight. And I've actually had PD days in which I call them FedEx days, and everyone will come together for a PD session, and we're going to identify a big problem or maybe multiple problems that we have in the district. And you have, a couple hours to come up with a solution. Because we want to deliver absolutely positively overnight. In that case, we're going to deliver at the end of the session. So what that does is that creates a sense of urgency to solve the problem. It also puts people in a very creative mindset because they're forced to work together and to collaborate and come up with big ideas. And you know what? I've done this before. I've come up with 16 terrible ideas, but 3 great ones. And those 3 great ones were typically used moving forward as we're going to make changes in our school. And our teachers love that concept because, having that collaborative spirit is very important. So winding down here, you've heard me talk a couple times about PBL for adults and the process. I think one thing we often miss in professional development is when it's over, and everybody goes home and we forget about it. Or we put it on the shelf and that's it. We don't spend enough time following up and thinking about next steps. So the 2 things that I have discovered through doing my podcast is if I was a principal today and I was going to allow teachers to do some of these different things in terms of creating their own choice board for professional development, as they're in small groups or even as individuals, at the end, I would have them present. And, everyone watches Shark Tank on TV. Everyone on Shark Tank is there to solve a problem, just like teachers. So the question is, what solutions are your teachers looking for? So it would be a scenario in which you would pick 2 or 3 people to serve as sharks. And then you would actually have a session in which people could come in and present their ideas to the sharks. And, maybe you have, a monetary award to go to those that have the best ideas, or you find ways to fund them all. But just kind of a fun activity, because most importantly, you're sharing these ideas. They're not just being held close to the vest or put in a notebook on the shelf. If we're going to take the time to do the work, this PBL for adults, we need to share it out with people. So don't be afraid to have a Shark Tank competition there in your own school. And then the other thing is, I kind of got a chuckle out of this the other day, but I wanted to include it anyway. The last podcast I did was with Dr. Doug Reeves, who's one of the foremost authorities on school leadership and leading deep change. He's written over 40 books. He suggested doing a science fair for grownups. He said, if you want to have real research that has an impact, it's not going to be $1 million study or anybody from Harvard talking about it. It's going to be the teacher down the hallway, who we've already identified, who says, hey, here was my challenge. Here was my practice. Here were my results. So if you don't want to do a Shark Tank, you let the teachers go out and pay the $3 for the little cork board that they get at Office Max. And, they share with everybody what the problem is, what the practice was, and what the solution is with results. And, maybe it's just a quick spin around the teacher's lounge to see what other people are doing. Those are just some general ideas that I think are important for you to think about as you reimagine, if you will, professional development. And the last thing that I'll tell you before I open it up to a few questions, if we have time, on February 3rd, the Principal Summit, KSA has a Principal Summit for the principalship. I'll be presenting a topic there on leadership, which is the principal's guide to leading school change. So if anyone wants to register, they can go to the KASA website. So with that, Mrs. Wade, I'll ask or try to answer any questions if possible.
One of the questions that did come up in the chat, Greg, was, is there a place that they can kind of get those templates? Some of the things that you shared.
If you send me an email, I'll share it with you. Yep, no problem. I'm pretty easy to find. It's Gregory_Goins at georgetowncollege.edu, or you can search it or hit me up on Twitter. I'm sorry, I didn't really look at the chat a whole lot. What else
That's
do
all
we
right.
have?
That I've kind of been monitoring as we go with some shout outs from Ryan about John Gordon.
Yeah.
We all love John. And Kate, I try to say yes as often as I can. The idea of that green light culture. Joseph had commented about the process for what Georgetown has. So
Yeah. So again, guys, I think you have to kind of rethink or reimagine what professional learning looks like in your school. The traditional model, has worked for a long time, but teachers want more and they deserve more. Let them have a greater voice and empower them to decide what it is they're passionate about in their classroom, and then give them the tools to kind of create those scenarios. And then it's up to you with how crazy you want to get at the end, if you want to do some type of public display. But if you have a Shark Tank, or if you have an adult science fair, or if you do a data sprint, hit me up. I'd love to come see it for myself.
well, thank you. You always share some creative ideas. I always pick up some new things every time I get to have some time with you. So we appreciate your leadership and the work that you're doing. And I will tell you, you helped me to feel a little bit more comfortable with the technology end of things. I always have a lot of anxiety, but so thank you for that. Is that you present it in a way that makes it a little less intimidating.
Wonderful. Glad to
For
hear.
somebody like me who may not be as into some of those things. So you give me some ideas on how I can be a little bit more comfortable, because the reality is a lot of my teachers are much younger, and these are the types of things that they are more interested in the platforms. And I kind of have to retrain my brain because I was brought up in the old school way of things, and I love all the new approaches, but I'm just not as comfortable. So thank you for that. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody else. Just as a reminder, since this is the last session, if you'll go back onto that main EdCamp grid, at the bottom left corner is the feedback and the ELA request form. So please make sure to provide the organizers with your feedback. That's so important to help us make this better for you. And obviously you've participated, so we want to make sure you get credit for your time as well. So thank you very much, Greg, and thank you everybody else.